As Pam mentioned, my name is Aaron Chum. I do have a slide with an old picture on it that I'll go through later on. But yeah, I am here to talk with everyone about how to privacy-proof your AI technology. Um, just very quickly, I do want to explain what Infotech Research Group is in 30 seconds or less, hopefully. I'm not going to drain this slide here. This is just our standard slide, but I do want to highlight that Infotech is an IT specific research company. We research from the perspective of business IT, right? So as IT leaders, what are some of the practical actions, projects, and resources that are needed for you and your team to execute or on projects and initiatives. But I do want to highlight that our focus, Infotech's focus, is on primary research. So all of the content that you see in today's presentation are primarily from what we call primary research, which is feedback from experts in the industry, your peers in the industry, and then we use secondary research to complete sort of our methodologies and such. So that's all I wanted to say about Infotech and the content that we're showing everyone today. So as I promised earlier, this is my old slide where I still had more hair. But my name is Aaron Shum. I am the VP of Research in Infotech Security and Privacy Research Practice. What that means is I run and direct the team that produces security and privacy specific IT content for Infotech members and customers. A little bit of background here. I have 25 years of experience in the IT industry. Notably 10 of which I was head of IT for a global system integration, custom software development and solutions provider that operated in 8 different countries. In fact, some of the contacts that we engaged for this research on AI and the privacy implications of AI came from some of my contacts and my good friends from that experience. I did spend also 2 years as head global director of GDPR compliance for one of Accenture's group companies, and since then been very close to privacy regulatory developments globally. I am a certified information privacy practitioner on the European side, certified information privacy technologist and certified information privacy manager. So definitely happy to provide my perspective here. Just a very quick, now we have a lot of content, as I mentioned earlier, so I'm going to try and sort of pace through them accordingly. And just a quick preview on the agenda here. I am going to talk a little bit about AI from the perspective of how we've been looking at it. I know everyone here is part of the AI community of practice, so the intent isn't to provide information you already know, but just to set the stage on what we're talking about here. I am going to spend a little bit more time on data privacy with the understanding that it is a peripheral and related element to the advent of AI. And then I'll go into some challenges that most industry professionals are facing when these two things intersect. And then I'll talk about solutions, right? The key really here is to share some of the best practices, considerations, and approaches when we talk about doing these two things together. And as Pam mentioned earlier, we will have a session on questions afterwards. All right, well, without further ado, I am going to start with AI technology. Now, of course, I think most of us here will understand that AI has been deployed in various form in wide spectrums of organizations, generally with you know, a little bit more practical lens than what was in you know, the sci-fi genre over the past years. But it is primarily to enable machines to perform things, either to perform the activities that humans do, think and reason as humans do, or think and work without independently without relying on human intervention. And the one of the most successful and increasingly leveraged AI discipline is machine learning. And when we look at all of the types of AI, I do want to set the stage for the scope of AI capabilities that we looked at in this research, and it is, as mentioned earlier, machine learning, use of algorithms and data to assist the computers in performing a task, right? And again, this is not an academic lecture on AI, so I'll quickly mention, there are the various types of machine learning, supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. Um, these days, I do have voice assistants. I think many of us have voice assistants and either on their phones or at home. So natural language processing is the other popular source of AI use, not just for consumer, but also in some commercial and sort of public setting as well. Computer vision is the discipline that bridges gaps between the computer world and what we see as people, right? And the computer vision capabilities of AI are taking what conventionally have been groups of pixels on a page or an image, and then leveraging that for capable use by an enterprise or an organization. And then lastly, for business leaders here, of course, robotic process automation, RPA, is a very popular discipline where it is looking at shifting high effort, high skill tasks into a computer assisted or operated capability. Intelligent automation tends to be the term, where it provides or it supplements a lot of steps that are part of a business value chain. All right, that's the background from an AI perspective. But I want to really start this conversation by highlighting that AI really is part of the data revolution, right? When we look at, I remember back in the early 2000s, late 90s, I did a lot of work in crystal reports, and it's sort of the advent of taking a data set and then creating visualized reports based and leveraging some very simple automation at the time to drive some of these business intelligence, right? What are some of the insights that we can derive from a data set if portrayed a certain way? And then as we look at the last 20 years and the development over the last 20 plus years, data science, big data, all of these things have really moved the industry towards AI being a really common term, right? When big data first came into effect, it was really just a set of formulas and policies that helped a lot of organizations see some insights, and now we've gone a lot further in terms of the Oxford English Dictionary definition is the theory and development of computer systems to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision making, translation. So, but I want to really highlight the fact that we draw this back to the data evolution, data revolution that is enabling the industry's use of AI right now. And that really is what most of us are looking at in terms of AI's benefit for organizations. It is a lot about operational augmentation, and of course, business of IT is what we're referring to here, and it's about AI focusing on all of these things here, or some of these things here, right? And it is focused on driving improvements in efficiencies. How can an AI operation create efficiencies for the organization? It is about processing copious amounts of data. It is looking at a process that's more reliable, right? Humans, in the cybersecurity world, we always preach that the weakest link is always the people, and in the business world, it's not any different, right? Human large volume processing by human hands are prone to mistakes and various other challenges. So we are looking to computers and the AI to create reliable, valid, and the high volume processing of data in an accurate way. And it is, again, I think I've already drained that one, strong link between AI, data science, data analytics. Sometimes it is looking at, uh, whether before applying AI, whether the organization or the operators of this capability have a strong understanding of the data environment, and it helps. It helps when the organization looks at, okay, what do we have in terms of data? How does AI allow sort of the processing of it, where our data is, and how are we going to use and leverage the data set? And it's not, of course, here we're talking to an audience from the California Department of Technologies, but just across most and almost all industries, there are key use cases for AI. For example, in financial services, fraud detection is mostly driven by AI. I just got a new credit card last week, and the first time I tried to use it, the card was blocked because from a location perspective, it was flagged that I was trying to buy something from a different country. So there's a lot of, of course, I'm not going to drain this slide here in terms of the examples, but there are a lot of key, applications of AI across industries, from a processing of business process perspective. In healthcare, of course, lots of usage of AI from a diagnosis perspective, processing data to generate understanding of patient experience, robotic procedures physically from a surgical support perspective. And of course, we are all consumers to a degree. So on the retail side, there's a lot of use of AI from a processing of customer relations and demographic reporting perspective. Aaron Shum likes these products, and of course the less privacy friendly aspect of, well, Aaron just bought these things last week, so let's sell him more of the same thing. Now, of course, again, in a manufacturing perspective, for example, assembly line, supply chain management, all of these have, tangible and strong results for the business in question. But I think the insight that I want to highlight here is, probably not a surprise to everyone here. Looking across the industry is often the best way of understanding how AI can benefit your organization, and industry leaders that have successfully deployed AI, or especially industry leaders that have not as successfully deployed AI, would be a really great way for an IT leader to diagnose whether application in that capacity is beneficial to your organization. Uh, as Pam mentioned, the deck will be uploaded for everyone's preview after this presentation. I do have a series of case studies that are here. I'm not going to drain the ones that are not as relevant for the audience here, but I'll quickly mention that in the financial services side, for example, this case study about JP Morgan Chase. By leveraging AI technologies for these three capabilities here, 360,000 hours of reduced time in implementation is quite significant, to the tune where leaders there decided to increase the company's annual AI technology budget by 7%. Similarly, on the retail side, of course, last Friday was just Black Friday. Monday, this past Monday was Cyber Monday. All of us probably bought something here or other. Retailers are now leveraging AI to create custom customer experiences. And as mentioned earlier, healthcare is a huge sector, especially with recent events. Where AI is really providing a lot of benefits. The example here is the use of machine learning and natural language processing. But for Vermont Conversation Lab, in the healthcare industry, it's a $34 billion revenue opportunity leading up to 2025. And there's significant, of course, business benefits to that industry from AI. But I do want to land on this case study here, and it is a public situation where, from a utilities perspective, and I'll spend a bit more time on this one. DC Water, Washington D.C. Has 1,800 miles of sewage, and being one of the earliest cities in the country. 701,000 residents, which seems small, from a capacity perspective, but 20 million annual visitors, right? Just delegates and tourists, that visit that city there. But it's one of the oldest utility system dating back to 1810. It's a very challenging infrastructure, like especially when we look at all of the conferences that happen there, all the tourism that happens there, and the situation that DC Water was faced with was the inspection process for sewers, and in the traditional sense, it was basically just video footage of sewers, and operators had to sit there hours and hours on end just looking at sewage passing through these pipes and looking at anomalies and pouring through it from a quality control perspective. And it was, staff fatigue was true. And as I mentioned earlier, humans are often the weakest link. And when your entire job is looking through sewage to see if there's any anomalies, that's probably not something that you really want to pay very close attention to all the time, right? So and ultimately it's really challenged because it's a manual process. So DC Water worked with a company called Wipro and Intel, and they developed an AI-based solution called Pipe Sleuth, and it's a computer vision solution leveraging machine learning model trained from 26,000 plus annotated image sources. And this ML technology essentially it flags and itemizes a lot of the anomalies based on, again, machine learning from these 26,000 annotated sources, to really expedite the ability to find some of the oddities that happen when you have so much sewage, aged sewage processing under your city, and from a results perspective, the graph on the right here is telling, right? The number of minutes needed to analyze 60 minutes of sewer pipe inspection video, generating a report that used to be an hour and a half initiative, and with Pipe Sleuth that has reduced it to 10 minutes. And from a from being able to just detect 50 anomalies in the wastewater infrastructure, the fact that there's it actually reduces up to 50% in scanning costs, and ultimately contributes to 350% ROI for the organization. And it's a bit of a no-brainer for DC Water to continue to increase the number of anomalies that they should cover. So I do want to engage the group here for those who would like to speak up and provide some of your thoughts. And it could be any of these three questions. If you have ideas about other innovative use of AI that you've been considering, I think myself and of course the group here would be interested to hear from you. If you see areas of opportunity where AI really hasn't been leveraged that you think is helpful, I think that'll be a great item to bring up here for this group. And also any other organizational benefits that hasn't been covered so far that you feel AI plays a key role in. Do I have any takers? Anyone who wants to share your thoughts?
Well, I'll break the silence here, and then maybe someone else will jump in. I know we had a session, I think it's been a year ago, where the State Water Resources Control Board did the computer vision, similar to the DC sewage thing, where they were looking at images of cannabis farms throughout the state to make sure that they actually have water rights, because that's a problem, people diverting waterways to water their farms without having the rights for it. So that was an application, kind of the same thing. It takes a lot of man hours to look through it. So they would have the computer imagery, flag things, and then they would use the man in the middle. Then their staff would just look at those things that got flagged. So similar use case, but something here in California. And I don't know if any of them are actually on the line today if they wanted to pipe up. But anyway, someone else has their hand up. So
go ahead.
This is Rashmikant from DCSS, Child Support Services. One of the interesting factors that I've come across, even looking at AI on one side, and my experience when I was in private industry, I was shipped to Peoria with Caterpillar, where they would receive they will receive from Thailand, for instance, they want to dig a particular mine or have a particular Caterpillar component specialized delivery. A lot of it was, the specification was dealt with a lot of people that were retiring that had knowledge, tacit, implicit knowledge base. So when you look at human error, in your slide, you mentioned that a lot of AI is now covering the gaps of that human error in large specification of data or componentry that we want to do. Knowledge management had tackle that area to look at how tacit knowledge or implicit knowledge can be captured, especially when somebody's retiring who has massive experience in guiding how do you build a particular earth mover and what experience they brought in. Where does AI sit with that? Because a lot of that knowledge base in reducing human error, if you look at the benefits, you mentioned large volumes of data with Hadoop and all that stuff that we went throughout our data analysis. But the knowledge base that sits to analyze data is more tacit, more implicit in people's, right? How does AI deal with that?
That is a very good question. I'm afraid I don't have the answer for you right now in terms of that. And that's really it, right? People ultimately are still a key part. I think sort of my response there is what we're seeing in the industry is there's still a strong push for a lot of human intervention for AI. I think less so for capturing of that tested knowledge, but more so to just validate that the AI processing is adequate. So, I'm going to take that one away. I do have a good friend who runs an AI business, and I'm going to see if they've cracked that nut in terms of whether there are any capabilities that they're working with some of the largest enterprises in the world, and whether that is something that is being developing in the industry. Okay, well, in the interest of time, you're welcome. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on here and start talking about the privacy side of our presentation today. Thank you both for your feedback there. So about data privacy, I think one of the key things in terms of some of the examples that I raised earlier, the fact that we have voice support analyzers on our phone. We have home automation assistants in our homes. The industry now, like if we look at global, like all of technology right now is very different from say 20 years ago, when only a small population in the world have smartphones, even. But privacy itself has been around for a long time. Those of you who are familiar with, of course, the definition of personal identifiable information, PII, it's this column on the left, right? It's things that we really don't want to have in our garbage bin, our home address, on our receipts and invoices, date of birth, social security numbers, banking information, passport numbers. But because there are copious amounts of data out there now, the development in the industry is that personal data now extends beyond just some of the private sort of PII information, but also include things like the actual sort of name itself, like my middle name, if not on a legal piece of document, is something that I can choose to have on my business records or not. The fact that IP addresses trace where I've been, email addresses, all my online identifiers, what I say publicly online, my location data, these are all now being considered personal data. And then when we go beyond that, especially when we think about biometrics, any health-related information I did mention earlier, any type of opinions, what groups I'm affiliated with, all of these are now considered this new category called sensitive personal data, where if exposed or leveraged in an incorrect way, could pose harm to either an individual or a group of individuals, right? So I do want to set this the tone here with the fact that, hey, what we understood as true PII has really changed over the last 20 years, and even as we look at California has a new Privacy Rights Act that's coming in effect January 1st, 2023. It does now have a special categories of personal data that makes up of most of these data types on the right. And in the current state of privacy frameworks that are out there, the Europeans, of course, led the charge a few years back and really worried a lot of the world by introducing GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Basically, I call it the regulation where you are guilty by association. Any organization that did any type of work or business with an affiliate or an organization that is in Europe suddenly became part of the GDPR scope. As I mentioned, in California, CCPA has been in effect for a few years now, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and now it's being expanded to the California Privacy Rights Act. In Canada, we've had PIPEDA for the longest time. And this is not the only list of federal or national privacy regulations. Countries all over the world have stood up privacy regulations over the last few years. But for those of you here in the audience, you'll be familiar with HIPAA that governs healthcare data, GLBA that governs financial institutions, and FERPA from a student privacy perspective. And of course, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, have created a privacy framework from a couple of years ago. ISO, the International Standards Organization, also now has a privacy framework standard as well. So we're only going to see more of this. And that really has driven the change in terms of the US privacy landscape, including in 2023, 4 different states, Utah, Colorado, Virginia, and Connecticut, have now their own privacy laws. As I mentioned earlier, California has California Privacy Rights Act. That's 5 states in addition to multiple states over the last few years that have decided to create their own privacy regulation. But it doesn't stop there. The FTC has earlier this year started drafting a federal privacy law. It's called tentatively the American Data Privacy and Protection Act, and it could essentially be a matter of months before it becomes more real. So it is something that could potentially preempt or change some of the privacy regulations and laws that both from the private sector and the public sector have been abiding by. So I'll spend a quick few seconds on what is CPRA for those who are not familiar with what's developing on the consumer and private sector side. CPRA is a statewide privacy regulation. It is an evolution of the previous CCPA, and CPRA is meant to take effect January 1st, 2023, with a look back to earlier this year. That means organizations that are in scope and under CPRA as of January 1st of next year will need to make sure that all their current practices are in place. And it is a landmark type data privacy regulation. It is very close, if not a little bit further in terms of scope than the European GDPR, and it is really privacy-centric consumer rights and closing loopholes that were in the previous CCPA. And as we surveyed companies out there, 90% of companies claim they weren't really prepared even for the previous regulation this year. So that's a bit concerning from a consumer's perspective, and I'll explain why. From a CPRA perspective, both CCPA and CPRA are about data privacy of consumers. I really, for the audience here, I'm providing it as a bit of a background in terms of the standard types of privacy controls that are really impacting use of AI these days. But looking at CPRA, for example, it is focused specifically on organizations that buy, sell, or share more than 100,000 consumer or household data. Right, so it is focused on companies that have a lot of consumer information, likely leveraging a lot of those information with use of AI. And the introduction here, the increase here from a CPRA perspective is of course adding sharing. CPRA applies to businesses, but also contractors, service providers, and third parties. There is a list of exclusions, but it's basically spreading a very wide net. It now requires data minimization, data retention, and purpose limitation. And I'll explain very quickly what those terms are. Data minimization means you only have as much data or leverage as much data as you need. Data retention, of course, you need to retain data for when you need them. And not further beyond your purpose. And purpose limitation is if I collected a set of data for a general purpose, for one purpose that's either consented by the individual or as dictated by the business or contract, that is the only purpose that as an organization we're allowed to use that data for. So all of these are very limiting capabilities that are now written into this law and also into other laws as well. It does require now running of privacy risk assessments and cybersecurity audits for any use of data under the law. That's consumer rights. The consumer rights, like the famous one, GDPR, is the right to be forgotten. Under California, a consumer can call up a business and say, "I want to know what data you have on me. I want to know what you use my data for. I want to exercise my right for you to delete my data." Now, there's a lot of nuances behind it, but that's really a new sort of evolution of what consumers or constituents these days expect to be able to do. Of course, if an organization spelled my name wrong, I have the right to call them up and say, "You spelled my name wrong." That and any other types of correction. And the consumer does now have the right to say, "Stop sharing my data, stop selling my data," right? The famous one being if you go, say, to Best Buy and buy something online, there's one checkbox that says, "By checking this checkbox, I agree to terms and conditions." And then there's a second checkbox that says, "By checking this checkbox, I agree to receiving marketing communication from Best Buy and its affiliates and other partners," right? So that consent element and being able to say, "Hey, I don't want you to do that anymore," is now a right that's developing, that people in general are expecting that they have the ability to have. And the last one being access to information about automated decision making. Like, what part of my credit application, I'll use sort of the financial industry as an example, what part of my credit application was automated? Was there a way to contest that application one way or the other? That is now also being something that laws are starting to write rules on. And from a CPRA perspective, enforcement is pretty significant in terms of especially any situation where children's data is involved. It's automatically $7,500 worth of fines per violation. So that's per violation per data item, data unit within a database. So you can see here very quickly if there's a database of 100,000 consumer information, let's assume they're not all children, there's still a pretty significant impact on the businesses that breach this rule. And then there's a dedicated enforcement agency that's involved here. The new thing, and I touched on this earlier, that CPRA brought, that CCPA didn't have previously, and I've already talked a little bit about some of these, is addition of sensitive personal information. Like it really is an evolution of what we previously known as PII. So it includes all of these things: geolocation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI related data sets. Any type of communication-related medium are now in scope. Genetics, of course, tends to be pretty sensitive. Some of the PI elements are now elevated to sensitive. Social security numbers, driver's license, state ID cards, passport numbers, these are all now sensitive personal information with heightened sort of protection requirements. And then also any type of account login. Every week we hear about one organization that suffered a data breach. It's login information often. It's your password. There are mediums out there where you can find whether your password has been pwned, has been used or leaked. So all of these information here: account login, financial account, debit, credit card, any type of authenticated use type information is now sensitive. So this really expands the scope of what data privacy covers, and it's not just the traditional elements. So I do have a question here. As my sort of second break here for those in the audience. Which ones here do you feel concerns the use of AI? Which of these rules that CPRA, as an example, is bringing to the regulatory landscape involves or would impact sort of AI use? I'll take one or two feel free to just shout out what you think. Which ones of these you think would be an impact on AI?
I mean, definitely. I mean, all of them.
I would
But
say the two middle ones maybe has more weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely data governance.
Yeah. So just looking at it at a high level, these are the ones that I think have a pretty significant impact on use of AI. And in fact, if I want to be choosy, I can flag that any business that are processing hundreds of thousands of consumer information, and thank you for the two of you for your thoughts there, probably have to have some sort of AI related business process. But from a scope perspective, when you leverage an AI solution, you're building an AI solution. As I mentioned earlier, data plays a big part. Where did the data come from? Who has processed that data? Was there consent in that data? So when we look at scope expansions in these regulations, the fact that you've got third parties involved here really opens up the scope. Data minimization, data retention, purpose limitation, these all are contrary to the notion behind how AI can be successful. How do you run a privacy risk assessment for a black box AI solution? How do you allow an AI that has a set of data that processes it? How do you correct information and ensure that it doesn't impact and break all of the processing that's happened to date? And again, limiting data is going to be hard. Explaining how the AI processed everything is going to be difficult as well. And when AI is processing copious amounts of data that are coming from multiple sources, how does an organization make sure that children's data wasn't processed, though, or if children's data needed to be processed? How do you make that delineation? So there's a lot of downstream impacts in terms of what this means when we look at organizations that are leveraging AI. So when we in summary, right, when we look at data privacy and protection regulations like GDPR, CPRA, any of the incoming AI regulations, it really calls into question these key data principles that AI is built on, right? When we look at the fact that AI is about profiling, or much of what AI uses is about profiling. It's about automating. It's about and really then it creates a dichotomy between the data processing at a large scale and increasing that efficiency to, well, how do we then minimize? How do we define periods of retention? How do we maintain transparency and being able to explain it? These are all pretty unique challenges when we look at data privacy versus AI. And I'll spend a little bit of time in looking at different regulations and different laws and how AI impacts it, right? So, but when we look at even just HIPAA, right, healthcare information privacy, we all care, of course, about our healthcare information. HIPAA does state that under notice and consent, individuals must provide written authorization, use, and disclosure of any PHI that's not for treatment, payment, and healthcare operations. So that already limits the use of AI from a healthcare perspective, because the patient must provide consent. Now, of course, if it's for the benefit of the patient, we needed the AI to process the patient's information in order to give them better care. That's probably valid reason, but it does introduce more paperwork to a degree, and also complexity to healthcare applications of AI in order of validating that consent. Now, HIPAA only applies to a subset of healthcare providers, so it creates sort of this delineation between organizations that are exempt from the hardest HIPAA restrictions to other organizations, and we're seeing sort of some healthcare tech providers that are not directly controlled by HIPAA to be able to leverage more of the technology, and it becomes sort of framing the use of AI and the consents that are transferred that are beneficial there. Moving on to GDPR, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to highlight that GDPR, even 4 years ago, stated the data subject shall have the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing. And we're seeing very similar language being used in other regulations now. Is if I'm a data subject and I know that my example earlier of the credit application, that there's some sort of automated thing that's happening here. I really want to be able to go to a person. My sort of personal example is I've been trying to track this order that I placed in during Black Friday, and every website and every process points me to a chatbot that's not giving me any of the information I needed. So when we look at application of AI from a regulatory perspective, there is going to be some sort of in intersection where regulations will require some sort of human intervention method. Extending beyond that, lawful reason of processing and being able to validate where automated decisions are made, those are all things that are developing. And going back to CPRA, because that's the closest regulation to home here, it is about reasonably necessary and proportionate in terms of achieving purpose for what the personal data information was collected. So, from a privacy regulation perspective, if a business or an entity collects a ton of information, it is now saying that you need to collect information that is reasonable and proportionate to the reason you're providing the business. So when a consumer fills out an application, either for credit, for creating an account, from a commercial or retail perspective, you now cannot ask for all the information under the sun, right? And then it goes further by saying that businesses can only collect information only for specific, explicit, and legitimately disclosed purposes. And consumers have the right to access and information about how companies use automated decision-making technology and the right to opt out of automated decision-making. And the reason why I brought sort of these here to the audience today is, as I mentioned earlier, states are creating additional regulations all over. Some of them have more focused, sort of consumer focused requirements, but others have more blanket organizational requirements for any type of state entity. So it's not out of the question that the eventual federal law and any sort of future legal developments will have similar language in terms of limiting use of data or having some requirements around that. Being able to focus on legitimate purpose only and controlling use of data, and also giving people, the individuals, the right to opt out of certain processes. So as we look at deploying, developing AI technologies for the future, we also have to look at what the future privacy landscape will look like so that we're not caught off guard in terms of some of these capabilities that we want to build in now. And when I do a Google search for AI and data privacy, it's quite interesting. What I get is this, right? So I think there's still a bit of taboo in the world, across the world, where we're looking at that sci-fi lens of what AI is, and in the sci-fi world where human-like robots and complex technology advancement is what's being deployed. Of course, as we know, as I explained earlier, the current application of AI, of course, very innovative and brings a lot of benefits to society in general. They're not quite as HAL, for example, in the sci-fi world or any other types of AI that's portrayed there. But I think one way to look at this really is AI is about trust in the end, right? The fact that the internet portrays AI and data privacy as Big Brother, looking at your sets of data, it really comes down to aligning good data practices, good consent and privacy practices to use of AI, so that consumers, individuals, constituents have a reasonable trust in terms of what AI is being developed. So the debate here really comes down to we live in a world where commoditization of data has been sort of the drive, right? Over the last 20 years, 30 years, it's about just getting as much data together, and the advent of the internet and social media has created platforms for it. So when we look at data privacy, as I mentioned earlier, it says data minimization is required. You can only collect as much data as you need. There's ownership. There's this growing notion of I own my data, and I want control over my data. And that organizations are now being forced to provide clarity and transparency in their data. So, and when we look at AI, right, the fact that it's built on the ability to leverage as much data as possible in order to increase accuracy and relevancy, in most cases favors the organization's business intelligence data strategy, right? It is about looking at, as an organization, we have this much data. How do we leverage this data to create efficiency, create optimization, bring sort of benefits to how we deliver services, right? And it is looking at all the data sets and doing permutations and profiling and trying to create imagery and models of how data can be used. So that you can see, like, those two are very different things. And to this quote here, right? As AI evolves, it magnifies the ability to use personal information in a way that really could intrude on data privacy by raising analysis of personal information to new levels of power, right? It's not just, hey, Aaron Chum is, it looks like, this, right? To, hey, based on the AI analysis of this individual's profile picture, we can derive a lot of personal information that otherwise should be anonymous, right? And we factor in things like DEI, the fact that if I didn't submit my photo and I'm speaking to you, without my video on, that paints a completely different picture than what an AI processing of this video could be. So it's not all doom and gloom, of course. When we intersect these two things, data privacy and AI, the intelligent optimization of existing business process can be done with data privacy in mind, and in fact, there is AI technology being used in the privacy field where maybe there is an application of an AI data broker. One of the best examples that I've heard from some of our customers is that in the marketing field, for example, there are AI-driven services where instead of a consent list, like I consented to receiving this email, and then the vendors selling that or providing that to a partner, they're providing hash codes that are being processed through machine learning on the back end. So it is possible to leverage capabilities here to protect personal data while providing business benefits. And by doing it properly, ethical use of AI also improves brand reputation or constituent trust, citizen trust, and really explainable transparency, privacy proofing what you're deploying is why we're here today. So what are the challenges that IT leaders are faced with these days? It is about developing a relevant use case of AI that is reasonable to the industry. You want to eliminate efficiencies, right? That's really the a big part of what many of us are looking at in terms of leveraging AI. And we want to retain trust, not just in citizens, constituents, consumers, but also our workforce, right? Our team members and our contractors are all part of the conversation here in terms of what AI is bringing to the table, but also the risks. We're looking to create and revise current data governance structure to enable AI. Why not leverage that as an opportunity to improve it so that privacy is considered? We want to align the privacy requirements and ensure that it becomes a standard rather than an afterthought. And part of it is making sure that we have explainable AI and leveraging explainable AI. Sheldon Fernandez is actually one of my good friends that I mentioned earlier. He runs a company called Darwin AI that's been providing a lot of AI modeling frameworks, technology for large enterprise deployments of AI. And his thoughts here is that AI by definition, by design, is often a black box, and without it being explainable, it's a challenge for organizations to really describe how AI is being used. So we want explainable AI solutions that can maintain objectivity in the chosen approach. We don't want to have any bias within the AI as much as possible. We wanted to inspect actions taken by AI technologies to drive a decision output, maintain accuracy and prediction, and basically oversee sort of some of the accuracy and predictions, promote traceability when the model makes decisions, and then apply discretion in terms of explainable model, right? For volume sensitive data, there has to be an input in terms of how to tweak some of these decisions that are being made by the machine. And when we look at making it explainable for data privacy. Data privacy calls for transparency in areas where AI is being typically opaque, and luckily within the European Union, well, I guess they're technically not in the European Union, the UK Information Consumer Commissioner's Office did work with Alan Turing's Institute to create a set of explainable AI capabilities that would be helpful for the privacy first lens. And what number one is data privacy calls for transparency. AI is typically opaque, so the accuracy of AI models are the contrary, right? It's passing volumes of data, and the more input, the more likely the model. So we want to make sure that the basics of explainable AI is the input or informed legal framework that comes in as a constraint or set of constraints for AI. We want to document benefits and risks as well as having that set of principles. And then when we look at it in practice, the tasks within the explainable AI, it's about data collection, prioritization, best practices, building the system, preparing, deploy, and present the explanation. And then to the organization, it creates the platform to define roles and functions of the explainable AI, policies, procedures, documentations. These are all things that will provide some of the backbone to explaining what this deployment of AI is intended to do. Given the time here, I did sort of I'm a little bit over time here by my clock. I won't train this case study. I do want to explain that one of the use of safe AI or privacy first AI here is NVIDIA produce a healthcare providers database where the data was kept on premise within the healthcare provider, and they used federated learning servers over a secure connection to process the data. So it removes sort of the duplication of data outside of the organization. It also reduces the risk of exposure. We've been seeing a lot of edge AI processing that's being deployed as well. And again, I won't train this one here. There are tons of regulations that are providing some of the restrictions that are driving that type of evolution. So when we look at business and IT leaders overall, though, right, this AI use over the last 10 years, 12 years, machine learning over the last 10, 12, 15 years, really is a relatively quick proliferation, and 91% of over 700 surveyed C-suite executives believe AI will enable them to outpace their competitors. But in the same group, only 14% believes their data is reliable and available organization-wide for this type of use. So it's really important that when we look at deployment of AI, regardless of privacy, is data first, right? We want to make sure that data governance and sort of that framework is important. So data governance, as I mentioned, is really the first enabler of AI, right? And ensuring that we focus on creating accountability at the internal, external stakeholder level, establishing set of data controls. My peer, who leads up data research here at in Infotech, often talk to our members about implementation of AI, and the first thing that he would bring up is, do you have a good data governance plan? And the answer often is, nope, we do not. So without a strong data governance framework, it's actually very difficult to harness the right power, the power of AI in an ethical and organization-specific way. It's basically a bit of a scattershot. Well, we're just going to grab a bunch of data, and hopefully the AI will give us some insights, and that opens up not just data privacy flaws, but also concerns in terms of the explainability and the ethical nature of your AI. But more importantly, for my role here, speaking to you today, there's that sort of conflict between what data privacy and AI accomplishes. And from technical frameworks around data explainability and differential privacy, which are slides that I have later on, it's also important that that there are privacy frameworks that are part of this conversation, even if there is no immediate application or requirement around automated decision making, handling, or data subject or individual access data. Those are common to all privacy regulations, and it should be considered as an organization embarks on the AI journey. So what that does here for this conversation today, though, is debate the business data inputs for a privacy-proof integration. It is about when an organization continues to hold more data on hand because they want to deploy AI, or they want to go and aggregate or collect data. The data governance enables the data-driven insight. Do we want that to be in a structured process? But beyond just initial classification of data as this is PII or this is PHI, there has to be some relevancy to data privacy requirements beyond just who the data belongs to, but how the data is being used. That's a very important part that often gets overlooked. A lot of data scientists look at sets of data and they say, well, these are PII, these are PHI. But as I explained earlier, a lot of these regulations now look at what is the primary business purpose of data. Of when you engage an individual and say, I want to collect your data for processing your driver's license application, that's one single use of data, right? So if the policy doesn't state that the state now then also could use that data and any publicly available data sources to create intelligence or automate parts of that driver's license application or processing process, suddenly there's a bit of consent disconnect there, where the AI use of all of other types of information, location data, geolocation data from freeway cameras or other types of sources. It's easy for us to look at it from what's the benefit to society? I want to implement this type of data processing in order to increase the efficiency or and so on. And it's easy for that to fall through, or for the rights of people to fall through the cracks. So here's the Infotech approach. I did promise a bit of solutioning. Here is our privacy-first approach to AI evaluation and implementation. Ultimately is about understanding AI from a data privacy lens, and then hopefully I provide a lot of the information here. But it's the business posture and the reasoning behind AI, not just the application and solution aspect, but also looking at how AI has been used across the industry, assessing the use case, and then reviewing data governance from an organization lens. And it is taking a deeper dive and reviewing ethical AI techniques, including explainability, differential privacy, and I have slides for that later, explaining how the AI applies the context of your operating environment. That's sort of one key step. But also continuously monitoring regulations enforced by external data privacy contexts and how that impacts AI. I would go beyond that and suggest that you look at some of the most restrictive data privacy regulations out there and plan towards that, because the chances are regulations are going to be tighter and not more forgiving over time. And CPRA would be a great example to look at in terms of automated decision making and consumer access that's required. And data. It's about the current state of organizations approach data. Do we have a good governance framework? And do we have the right classification and privacy program support for the deployment of AI? So we do have some suggestions in terms of tools, tooling, collaborative. And again, I'm not going to explain sort of the Infotech approach, but the highlighted steps. So from a data governance perspective, having a data governance plan is important, an implementation roadmap that will inform some of the decisions that your AI implementation will require, and then partnering with the data governance side to drive sort of that evolution of the data governance program. And then on the data privacy side, collecting privacy requirements, conducting gap analysis to understand, hey, maybe it's not the AI implementation where the gap exists. It could be the agency or the state operational level where there are some privacy gaps in terms of evolution of the process, and understanding that informs the AI implementation. Having a roadmap to understand, if I can't use this set of data right now because of data governance or privacy gaps, is it something that I can leverage later on? And having that conversation is important. I won't drain this slide here. Their explainability does impact privacy from this perspective. Being able to understand the AI's variance in terms of accuracy and predictability plays a big role. But more importantly, I think even if we look at CPRA, right? Profiling and giving consumers opt-out right with respect to business use of automated decision making. That basically points to being able to explain how and where the AI happened and whether the individual has any right or process to remove themselves from that processing. So, using, of course, sewage was the public sector example, which probably doesn't have a lot of true sort of personal aspect, but to my example earlier on any type of citizen or constituent data processing, understanding where the aggregation of data stops and where the individual's data is no longer or reasonably re-identifiable, that's probably something that's doable. right? At which point of aggregation does a zip code no longer discloses the location of a set of constituents is something that that when we look at AI implications and explainability for the AI use of that is important. So I'll quickly touch on differential privacy. It is a formal data privacy model from a that allows organizations to process and use high volumes of sensitive data for business purposes. And it's a very complex, and my friend tried to explain it to me, and it completely blew my mind. It is a mathematical definition of privacy in the context of statistics, machine learning. So it is something to consider in terms of whether a solution, especially if you're buying off the shelf solutions, whether they're explainable, and whether there is differential privacy considerations embedded. There is a broad spectrum of cross-industry use for differential privacy as well. Tech giant Apple, for example, they apply privacy at scale. Tim Cook will talk about it at all the privacy conferences, and the fact that all of their current processes leverage differential privacy to collect and aggregate information without exposing the privacy of individual users, right? To my point, example earlier, CRM capabilities, CRM databases, data brokers that are selling and buying lists of data using hash codes rather than using the list of hash codes on the intent of the list rather than the transferring the lists back and forth is a bit of an evolution of that as well. So with all these regulations in mind, with all of the advent, I do want to provide an open source sort of free tool. I actually live in Canada. I am based in Toronto, Ontario. The Canadian government a couple of years ago has released an algorithmic impact assessment. It's very similar to a privacy risk assessment that can be leveraged to diagnose and also document whether an AI implementation has the right transparency, and whether there were any areas that are opaque or by design, opaque by design, documenting the individual data subject groups and across what systems. I would highly recommend looking at this as an example, or any other AIA type of procedures or processes as a way to document and ensure that your algorithm doesn't provide any privacy harm. On a related note, many of you are likely familiar with the privacy impact assessment process, where for a new application or a new business process, you undergo the necessary due diligence in terms of answering the key questions. Who are the people? What are the data sets? Did they provide consent? And across what applications, what type of data? And are there any potential risks to individual? What are the mitigation steps that are in place? The CPRA now introduces that to the private sector as well, for those that are outside of the typical government healthcare where PIAs are common. That is something that is going into the private sector as well, and it is a good exercise to include, in addition to the AIA, a PIA to ensure that if there are potential privacy data that's processed by the AI, that there is a documented process. There are mitigation steps in terms of, do we aggregate or anonymize a set of data before input to the AI? And I think the uncomfortable question sometimes is, if the AI is combining multiple sets of data and doing potentially public scraping of information in order to come up with the decisions that are needed, do these sort of overstep some of the privacy rights of people, and documenting that and trying to find mitigating actions are necessary as well. So just 2 more slides. I do apologize that this is a very content heavy session, so hopefully everyone's enjoying their time so far. But I do want to share some key insights, and I'll have some sort of suggested next steps. Data privacy first, AI second. Of course, as a privacy practitioner, it's easy for me to say, but really understanding that internal environment, external environment, and use of AI goes beyond just the output of the AI. That sometimes a lot of the inputs to the AI has ramifications to the individuals, and that has to be something that has to be reviewed and vetted, and as I mentioned earlier, have due diligence performed so that there is no unintended impact to the individual. And understanding of the data privacy environment, both for the organization and externally for the implementation of AI, is critical. We want to assess the changing landscape. I think I've beat that one to death. Even though there is no current federal privacy law and the CPRA is private sector focused, the all expectation is that a future regulation will require similar requirements. So applying that intelligently or in an informed way to your AI implication will be important. Look before you leap. In addition to just, well, we've got these data sets, we've got these business problems to solve, understanding and establishing privacy posture and including a data governance first approach, and informed by the privacy, the organization's privacy program strategy is important. And then just a couple of peripheral insights here. Be precise and look at all the potential ways AI can improve existing organizational processes, but govern your data, right? Data governance and environment is important before AI implementation. So yeah, I think I've already beaten this one to death, but I did we did Infotech interview one of my acquaintances from the past, Kabir Bardet, who's CEO of one of the biggest privacy management platforms out there. His words were, policy always lags behind technology, right? So when we look at AI being a dramatic example of that, right, it's a lot quicker for technology change than any sort of policy level changes. So we need to be cognizant of that as IT leaders, that it can't be, well, not quite my problem. We have to consider that if the state or the agency has policy changes that require additional time, that we're factoring that into our AI implementation. So takeaways here: govern your data. I think I beat that one to death. Injecting privacy and data protection concepts into your conversations about AI is important, beyond just how do we enable the organization. And then let's look at the industry, right? If others have charted the course, that's going to be a good driver. And of course, if there are unsuccessful or challenges with AI deployment in similar industries, that's a good example to leverage. Okay, so that's it from a content perspective. I think we can go into 9 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Aaron. And we can go ahead and stop the recording now.